I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation, killer moms. And we begin with a case that's 30 years old. Susan Smith murdered her two boys by locking them in her car and then drowning them in a lake. It was a case that made her public enemy #1. Here's the story. It was one of the most notorious cases in court TV history. Susan Smith called law enforcement saying she had been carjacked by a black man who took off with her two young boys, Michael and Alexander, who were still in the car. Investigators questioned the story from the beginning and eventually uncovered the horrific truth. Susan Smith locked her boys in that car and rolled it into a lake where the boys suffered and then died. Susan was convicted of double murder, but was given an extremely light sentence under the circumstances. 2 concurrent life sentences with a possibility of parole after just 30 years. Well, 30 years have passed, and Susan Smith is trying to get out on parole. What a case. I mean, everyone, if you remember court TV from years ago, but if you were just, watching what was happening, this was a huge, huge story. This mother saying, my children are missing for 9 days, and then finally the truth comes out. Investigators knew pretty early on. So it's been 30 years now, and now she's trying to get out on parole. So one of the things you have to do is you literally go in front of the parole board. Like, you have to speak to the parole board, answer their questions, provide a statement, give them a reason to let you out for double murder after just 30 years. Take a listen to Susan Smith making her plea to be released.
First of all, I want to say how very sorry I am.
It's okay, Susan. Just talk with us.
I know that what I did was horrible. And I would give anything if I could go back and change it. And I love Michael and Alex with all my heart.
Ms. Smith, were you under the influence of drugs or alcohol the night that you murdered your children?
No, ma'am, I was not.
Your attorney talked about working with mental health. Is that helpful to you?
Ma'am.
Mr. Thomas.
I hear you.
Mr. Thomas talked about the fact that you were working with mental health, and my question is that helpful to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that you would be willing to continue with on the outside if you were granted parole?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Smith, your crime took a lot of resources from the law enforcement community. What, if anything, would you say to the folks who worked so hard to find your children if you had the opportunity to speak to them today?
That I'm sorry that I put them through that. I really, really am. And I'm especially sorry to the drivers that I had to find them. I wish I could take that back. I really do. I didn't lie to get away with it. I really didn't. I was just scared. I didn't know how I could tell the people that loved them that they would never see them again. I didn't know how I could tell David he couldn't see his sons again. And I'm sorry. I don't know. I know that's not enough. I know it's not, but I don't know. I know those just sound like words, but they come from my heart. They really do.
Right. One of the things that we review is your institutional record, and you've had some infractions throughout the years, some involving the use of some narcotics. Do you have any issues with drugs or alcohol at this point?
I don't. No, ma'am, I don't.
And you had a recent disciplinary infraction just a few months ago. So why should this board think that if we grant you parole that you're going to go out and follow the rules and the laws of society if you do not follow the rules within the institution?
Well, this last infraction, I was trusted the wrong person. This lady contacted me, and I trusted her. I thought she was going to do a documentary on mental health, and I really am not guilty of what they charged me with, and I have filed an appeal on that charge. And as far as your question, I've never been in trouble before, and the things that I have been found guilty of in here have been just stupidity. I know I made a lot of mistakes in here, and I have learned from them. And before this last infraction, it had been 10 years. Because I grew up and I knew that I needed to stop making dumb decisions. And I did. I knew it was time to grow up and do the right thing. I just made a lot of dumb choices and mistakes in here. So I know I've learned from those mistakes.
What do you feel is the most important thing that you've learned while you've been incarcerated?
Ma'am?
What do you think is the most important thing that you have learned while you have been incarcerated?
That people are important, that forgiveness and love, that family is important, and that decisions we make don't just affect us, they affect the people that we love. And not to take things or people for granted.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us today that wasn't in your packet or that has not already been said?
I would just like to say that I am a Christian, and God is a big part of my life, and I know He has forgiven me, and it is by His grace and mercy that, and I have a lot of faith, and I live by that every day. And I just ask that you show that same kind of mercy as well. And I guess, yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
30 years. She waited 30 years for those words. That's what she chose. So this statement brings us to our first question in this investigation. It's an important one. Was Susan Smith sincere in front of the parole board, right? I think they have to judge credibility, sincerity. Obviously, they still understand what she did because she's a convicted double murderer, but was she sincere in front of the parole board? Here to break it all down, to break down Susan Smith's body language, human behavior expert, Susan Constantine, also with us, psychotherapist, CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey. Great to have you both here. All right, Susan, let me begin with you. Did you see and hear sincerity coming from Susan Smith?
What I saw mainly was self-pity. So when we're seeing her dabbing her eyes, those are crocodile tears. They do spread, by the way, from one corner to the other, but the constant dabbing of the eyes just didn't seem really real to me. Based on the research that I have done when it comes to crocodile tears, this is not what I would have seen, because there are other missing elements. You know, she didn't have the symmetry in her facial expressions. You didn't see the true sadness and remorse in her eyebrows and her forehead. And then I know we're going to get into some other clips later on, but the overall what I saw is almost victimization, even towards the very end when they asked her, what did she learn? The second thing that she said was forgiveness. You know, I mean, forgiveness? Her forgive someone else or others forgive her? So,
right.
You know,
that was kind of bizarre. That was a little bizarre. Dr. Janie Lacey, what did you see and hear from Susan Smith?
I think when we look at sincerity, there's certain degrees to it. So there could be certain degrees to her sincerity, but I do agree with my colleague that more of the self-victimization coming out from that place of feeling sorry for herself potentially. And when she was asked that question about what has she learned, I would have liked to see a stronger response of taking responsibility and actually saying her son's names of Michael and Alex and really kind of tying back the lessons learned that she specifically learned about herself and potentially how she can now pay that forward. And that moment of having to think through it and using these broad statements would show potentially to me there's a lack of true introspection, which then can show that lack of true sincerity as far as the crime that was committed to her sweet boys.
Great insight. Susan Constantine, I want you to take a look at this. This is from WYFF back in 1994. Susan Smith making the appearance while her children are still missing.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much.
Now, let's compare that to today when she was talking.
First of all, I want to say how very sorry I am.
And here's a little side-by-side of Susan Smith then and now. Susan Constantine, your thoughts?
Do you see any difference, Vinny? It's the same Susan Smith. This is that duping delight. She does the eye blocking, the eye shutters. This is so consistent with deception. It reeks it. So when you're seeing this duping delight, it's an expression of getting away with something. It's almost kind of like the Chichester cat, right? That just kind of got into trouble and they get that big grin. But she's trying to conceal it. And when she conceals it, it leaks out. This is micro expression, leaks out into the corners of her mouth. So anyway, deception all the way. I didn't buy it one bit. Same Susan Smith from then and it is today. And I remember this so distinctly because I was
and it was great that we had a baseline of her deception from 1994 to compare.
Right.
Susan Constantine, Dr. Janie Lacey, thank you. Coming up next, will Susan Smith ever get parole?
But ultimately, to me, that's only 15 years per child. Her own children. It's just not enough. I understand back in 95 that through the state's law, life in prison meant 30 years to life. And now that's different, but at that time, that's what counts. I understand that. But ultimately, to me, that's only 15 years per child. Her own children. It's just not enough. So I'm asking that you please deny her parole today. and hopefully in the future, but specifically today. Not let her out. I miss them very much, and I love them very much. And I will be here every 2 years going forward to ensure that their death doesn't go in vain.
That's David Smith, Susan Smith's ex-husband and the father of little Michael and little Alex, the two little boys that Susan murdered. Now, he was pleading, don't let her out. Parole board did not let her out. But as you heard, she'll get another chance, and potentially another chance, and another chance, which brings me to my next question. And it's all about Susan Smith. Will Susan Smith ever get parole? Will it happen? Opportunity after opportunity. I've seen it. I've seen cold-blooded cop killers get paroled. Joining me, two guests. First, the prosecutor who prosecuted Susan Smith. Tommy Pope is with us, and former district attorney in Pennsylvania, served on the Pennsylvania Board of Probation and Parole, and he's now a professor and author, Matthew Mangino. Great to see you both. Thank you for being here. Tommy, let me start with you. You're in South Carolina. Unfortunately, I've seen it through the years. Time seems to heal all these wounds. The Menendez brothers are getting out, right? The Menendez brothers are going to get out. I've seen in New Jersey, there was a case, cold-blooded cop killer was on death row, the law changed, then he gets paroled. So do you think that Susan Smith will ever get parole down in South Carolina?
I think what you just showed with David Smith, that was David Smith's heart 30 years ago, and you saw it today, and it's just as strong, that emotion. Those were real tears in David Smith's eyes. And I feel that as long as he draws breath and as long as I can help him, we'll be there every 2 years to make sure she doesn't get parole. But I will tell you, as you just pointed out, you have to be vigilant and you have to stay at it. And so, unfortunately, fortunately, she didn't get out. Unfortunately, this family's got a every 2 year sentence where they have to relive this again and again and again.
Matthew Mangino, put me in the shoes of the parole board. It's part of the law, right? Everyone who comes in front of a parole board is a convicted criminal. Some of them are murderers, like Susan Smith. They always have a story to tell. You can't blanket across the board, deny parole to everyone, otherwise there'd be no parole system. So put us in the shoes of the parole board. What impacts them, and then how do you think it will manifest itself in this case every 2 years?
Well, Vinnie, at the outset, I would tell you that, based on my experience, having interviewed thousands of inmates who were eligible for parole in Pennsylvania, Susan Smith was not going to be paroled. Based on her conduct in prison, which is an important thing that parole board members consider, programming, what did she do? Can she articulate what she learned in programming and how that's impacted her life? But more importantly are issues of remorse and taking responsibility. And as I listened to her today, she did neither. She had no real genuine remorse, and she was still minimizing her conduct while she's been in prison, and even her conduct with regard to the death of her children. She's still minimizing the crime. And I can tell you, as a parole board member, you're not going to get anywhere in terms of release if that's the approach you take at a hearing, and that's your conduct while you're in prison.
Tommy, as you watched Susan Smith in front of the parole board and heard what she had to say, did you see a different person from 30 years ago, or did you see the same person from 30 years ago?
Ironically, Vinnie, I saw the same person, not necessarily that the jury saw, but I saw the same person I saw in the courtroom. We had the vehicle testing, where we learned that the car sank for 6 minutes. The video showed what the boys would have been facing. She could see the video. The jury's not in, and she's giggling and writing notes to the defense counsel staff. When the jury comes back in, she throws the switch, and suddenly, as the jury's watching the video, she's crying. So Selfishly, I'm glad the world now sees the Susan Smith that we saw 30 years ago that unfortunately the jury wasn't able to see. Everything she did in that courtroom was orchestrated and part of a show.
Matthew Mangini, how much impact do the victims have when they come back? Because so let's say for whatever reason down the road, the victims aren't available and it's just her side. How much does that impact her chances?
Well, I don't think that it'll have a dramatic impact. We have these statements, and they're already, made a part of her file. Obviously, if they can't come back in person and provide testimony to the board, that could have some impact. But it's humbling to be here with Tommy Pope, who prosecuted this case, and I'm sure he's going to be vigilant every 2 years, because as a parole board member, I look very closely at the prosecutor's position, the judge's position, and obviously the victim's position. So I think they're secure, and that Tommy Pope is not going to let the parole board forget about what Susan Smith did and how she did it.
Tommy Pope, Matthew Mangino, appreciate your insight. Thank you so much. Got a lot more to get to. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of killer moms. Now we turn to the case of Chloe Driver, a young mom who was part of a polygamous cult. Her story is tragic and involves manipulation, mental illness, and extreme violence. Here's the story. Little baby Hannah was just 13 months old when her mother, Chloe, took her life, stabbing the baby to death in their home in Canton, Georgia. Why would a mother take her baby's life? What was going on behind closed doors? Prosecutors say it was a non-traditional lifestyle involving polygamy and a cult. Chloe was married to a man named Benjamin, the cult leader, but she was not his only wife. Prosecutors say Chloe was upset that she wasn't getting enough attention and killed her child in an act of murder and attempted suicide fueled by twisted jealousy. The defense blamed a mental breakdown by Chloe, who they say was legally insane at the time, suffering from delusional thinking and trying desperately to break away from the group. It's a tragic story that contains many lingering questions about Chloe's state of mind. Her state of mind is what the trial was all about, claiming legal insanity in this one, that she couldn't distinguish right from wrong. It was detached from reality at the time that she killed her child. I want you to take a listen to this. This is an important part of the determination in all this, which was the verdict. It's in the state of Georgia, where when you claim legal insanity, the choices are a little different. So listen closely.
For each count below, we, the jury, found the defendant, count 1, malice murder, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but mentally ill. Count 2, felony murder, aggravated assault, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but mentally ill. Count 3, felony murder, cruelty to children in the first degree, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but mentally ill. Count 4, aggravated assault, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but mentally ill. Count 5, cruelty to children in the first degree, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but mentally ill. So found this 20th day of November, 2024.
Guilty, all counts, but mentally ill. An acknowledgement by the jury that this young mother who killed her baby, who murdered her baby, is suffering from mental illness and was suffering from mental illness at the time that she murdered her baby. Mental illness, part of a polygamous cult. Suffering from mental illness, but part of a cult. And that brings me to my next question about what happened here to that child. What about the cult leader? She's found guilty but mentally ill. But how about the man who is leading her in this cult? while she's mentally ill. Joining me to help figure all of this out, retired police commander, religious cult expert, host of the podcast Profiling Evil, and the author of the book Deceived. Mike King is with us. Also with us, psychotherapist, CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey. Great to have you both here. Let me start with you, Mike, and your thoughts about the cult leader. What about the cult leader and the death, the murder of this child by a member of his cult who's mentally ill?
You know, Vinnie, I've shared with you many times, my concern has always been more about those who are number 2 and 3 down the rung in these cult organizations than these self-proclaimed prophets who say, hey, I'm the voice of God, but you're lucky enough to be the arm of God or the one that gets to act out these things. So I think there needs to be a whole lot more investigation done into what that relationship was, what the ideology was, what the methodology was of how you cleanse yourself when you're out of sync with the group, because we know that cults will love bomb you in, but when you disagree, they do the exact opposite, and they shun you and push you away until you come back in line. I think a lot about things like the Crumbly case and the fact that his parents ended up getting charged for things that he did. And I wonder if those things are still in reach in cases like this, because that cult leader certainly creates a mindset that people want to show obedience to.
Now in this case, Chloe Driver attempted to take her own life as well. She took the life of the baby, unsuccessfully took her own life. Dr. Janie Lacey, I want you to listen to another former wife of the same cult leader who attempted to escape. Take a listen to what she had to say.
You referenced the fact that at certain points when you left him that you wanted to commit suicide, is that right?
Yes.
And you've never been diagnosed with any type of mental illness?
No.
Was that based on the reality that you were living in with him, that you wanted to end your life?
I just think he drives women to not even necessarily women, men too, but predominantly women. He just drives them to such a crazy point with all these crazy ideas that he puts in their head, making them question everything about reality, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing, but then it's like your reality is totally like broken apart, and then he starts connecting all these dots for you and starts controlling the way you think.
Dr. Janie Lacey, let's take what is the relationship between that cult leader and someone who is determined to be mentally ill? Can it be the manipulation of the leader that puts you in that state, or are you in that state and manipulated in that state?
Well, Vinnie, it's very complex, but we know with someone like a cult leader, power and control and systematically taking over the mindset of those who are most vulnerable. Most vulnerable potentially could have had previously abuses, could have had neglect, could have had trauma, not making any excuse at all for what has happened in this case. But for the cult leader, will vie on the fact that there are these young women or potentially men that are hungry for this attention and a feeling of belonging. When we look at birthrights from a very young age, everyone has this sense of belonging. But when you're in these situations or potentially in family of origins where there is trauma, where there's neglect, and there's certain things that are set into place that make you vulnerable, then when you get to certain places like a cult, for example, then you become very vulnerable to succumb to the mindset. But it's very systematic. As I heard my colleague use the word love bomb, right? So there's a certain level of studying what that potential victim may need, and then they become what you may need until they know that there's a certain level of attachment where they can influence your behavior systematically over time.
All right, Mike King, I want to put up on the screen a couple photos here of some folks a photo of folks you'll recognize. On the left and on the right, that's Vallow Daybell. She was a follower of the man on the right, the prophet, Chad Daybell. Was also her husband after their spouses were murdered. But she was a follower of his in his cult that he was building. I want you to take a listen to Lori in court on yet another murder case involving her fourth husband. But here it's all about what's going on in Lori's mind.
Well, ma'am, I would ask you a series of questions, and that could inform what happens next.
Yes.
Have you previously, in any other criminal proceeding, been referred for a competency determination?
Yes, previously.
All right. And were you ever previously determined to be incompetent at any point?
Not to my understanding. So my understanding was that the judge did the same thing that you did. In abundance of caution, let's go ahead and put her in and see. And I came out competent.
Well, when you say you came out competent, was there a period of time where you were ruled as incompetent?
I would say technically they did do that. That's how they put you into the program in that state. Correct.
How long were you in that program?
I was in that program for about 10 months.
Okay. And what types of things did they give you classes? What types of things did they speak to you about where you went through some process where you were later deemed competent?
I did go through a process of several things, several classes, competency class, and meeting with doctors and evaluators, many evaluators.
Are you aware of any diagnosis that you were given?
Yes.
And what is that?
We're going to object to that, especially with this being public and on field.
It's no relevant determination. Okay, well then...
This was almost 2 years ago.
Then I'm going to keep her in the Rule 11 process to determine that. And
approach and discuss with you without it being on the without public, on the record, but not public.
You mean as far as the diagnosis?
Yes.
Sure. The prior attorneys requested a Rule 11 based on their observations. In their motion, they cite that she's, in their opinion, suffering from some form of delusions. Next, she's been previously, in their motion, found incompetent in another jurisdiction and went through a restoration process. By her own account here today, she was in that for approximately 10 months, which seems, I know it's a different jurisdiction and it's a different standard, but it seems that anyone that's in that process for 10 months is a significant period of time before they're determined to be competent to stand trial. So based on those factors, I think there's definitely enough to continue with the Rule 11 process.
All right, Mike King. Obviously, there's some mental issues with Lori Daybell. We've known that. There was no insanity defense. It doesn't really exist in Idaho for her trials. But it's clearly an issue in her life. Her cult leader, Chad Daybell, was prosecuted for the murders, even though he didn't necessarily physically do them himself. She's suffering from some mental issues. He's the leader. He's never claimed any mental issues. He was never found incompetent. How do you see that case in terms of looking at this cult leader versus Chloe Driver's cult leader?
Well, I look at them kind of entirely in separate buckets, Vinny, because as I watch Lori Daybell again, it's like she's in a job interview and she's trying to prove that she is competent, that she's aware of what's going on, but most importantly, that she's inspired by the God that she believes in, and that God told her to be a part of all of this, whether she took a part in the physical action or the conspiracy aspect, it doesn't matter. But to her, it's proving that I still am right, I still did the right thing, and I'm following this God that I believe in. Chloe, I think, is a little bit different because she was going through some not only feelings of paranoia as they separate them, they go through this process called search and separate where they pull them away from everything that's positive in their life and break them down so that they give in and go along. And she was not only paranoid, but she was depressed. And she was afraid her whole life was collapsing around her. She still knew what was right and wrong, and she still chose to kill that little baby. But she was making choices on her own, but she was doing it in a really compromised emotional state, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you, Mike. Mike King, thank you so much. Dr. Jenny Lacey staying with us. Still to come, was justice served?
Ms. Driver was suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the crime. She was suffering from delusions telling her that she needed to die
Coming soon to Court TV.
It's the biggest story that we're covering.
He is the boogeyman.
Vallow Daybell.
She said, I will have you destroyed.
She's got another murder trial coming up.
A social media sensation, now a suspected killer.
We will not stop fighting. We have no quit.
Sean Diddy Combs arrested on a federal indictment.
The high-stakes trials you don't want to miss. Coming soon. Only on Court TV.
I told you when I stood up before you in opening statements that Hannah would get lost this week. That there would be a lot of shiny objects, there would be a lot of scandalous evidence, there would be a lot about Chloe Driver, the cult they were in, Benjamin, his abusive, controlling practices. And all of a sudden, just like that, we forget why you were all here. This is why. You will have an indictment. And the indictment is not about Chloe Driver being a victim. It is about Hannah being murdered. The defense has spent the week talking about how Chloe loved her child. Nobody has to establish that she didn't love her child. The element of the criminal offense is what her intention was in committing the act. And the intention in committing the act of stabbing that child to death doesn't have to be based on ill will or hatred. It can just be the unlawful intent to kill another person without justification. That she had malice and that she had every intention for Hannah to die.
Powerful closing argument in the case against Chloe Driver, and showing the victim was just this small little baby Hannah. Now, she was mentally ill. She attempted to take her own life after taking the life of her child. The jury acknowledged that in their verdict, guilty but mentally ill, which is different than not guilty by reason of insanity. Not guilty by reason of insanity, you go to an institution, and when you're no longer a danger to yourself or others, you have an opportunity to be released back into society. Guilty but mentally ill, you get the treatment, but you go to prison for the rest of your life. Which brings me to my next question. Probably the most important one. Was justice served? Was justice served in this case? Joining us, my friend and retired judge, Larry Seidlin, who presided over the Anna Nicole Smith body custody case, and still with us, Dr. Janie Lacey. Great to see you, Judge. Let me ask you, these are difficult cases when you talk about defendants with mental illness, but you're also talking about someone who murdered a baby. Was justice served here?
Justice was served. She committed a horrific crime, an absolute heinous crime. She tortured these two children before they died. She straps them into the car and then sends the car into the lake. God created mother to care for their children, to love their children, to nurture their children. It sickened America. It sickened everyone's soul what she did. And the pain that she's feeling being in jail should remain with her for the rest of her life. She should never get out. Never. And why would she want to get out? Does she want to have joy now outside the jail? Her children have no joy. They were killed by her. Why should she get out? And why should she want to get out? And in this jail that she's in, she seems to be like at a Greek orgy. She's having sex with the prison guards, having drugs, and getting a documentary done about her.
Judge Larry,
even more than she is presently,
absolutely.
Vinny.
And Judge Larry, obviously referencing Susan Smith, I'm going to bring it back, Dr. Jane Lacey, to Chloe Driver now, and looking at cases of insanity. Andrea Yates, we remember that case from years ago. This is someone who's found not guilty by reason of insanity. The circumstances there, perhaps quite different than this case. She wasn't in a cult, but she was under the control of her husband, you know, locked in a bus, living in a bus and homeschooling all these children all at once. You also have Vallow Daybell, who was found guilty of murder. She's suffering from some mental illness. What are your thoughts about Chloe Driver getting some treatment but then being locked up, Dr. Janie Lacey?
Well, Vinnie, in all the cases that you mentioned, we can learn a lot about them and from them in order to help and to have levels of prevention where we can in the future. But when we look at this case and the evil act of this mother that was stabbed her baby Hannah to death and then trying to take her own life, yes, it's okay for us to understand the context of her delusion and her irrational thoughts and being in the cult, but looking at the consequences from the choices that she's made, I believe that, that probably was what was best as she gets the treatment and then serves time. But there's a lot that we can learn from these cases so that we continue to help mothers or to help parents going forward to prevent these things from happening to future children for sure.
So, Judge Larry, I want to zoom in on your legal expertise because we're talking here right now about Chloe Driver in Georgia, found guilty but mentally ill, an acknowledgement that she's mentally ill, but she's going to prison for the rest of her life. What are your thoughts in a circumstance like that?
Yeah, she also deserves to be placed in a secure facility. I mean, the community has to be protected, Vinnie. As you have children and I have children, we want them to be safe in their community. And we can't be such bleeding hearts that we're letting these nuts hit the street where we're at risk. And that's the problem. We do have compassion. We do have a great love for God, but we want to protect our loved ones. We want to protect our family members. And it's too much risk letting someone like this woman hit the street. You're putting everyone in danger. The community must be protected. This is the best place for her to be in a jail cell.
Yeah, and I like the way Georgia does it, though. They acknowledge the mental illness, you get the treatment, but you protect society. Judge Larry, great to see you. Dr. Jenny Lacey, appreciate your insight as well. Now, when moms kill, it always makes big news because it goes against everything we as a society believe about moms. They carry life, they bring life, and they sacrifice so much for their children's lives. That's why in most of these cases, there's some level of mental illness involved. But mental illness is a medical term. It's much different than legal insanity, which is a legal standard. And that's why our system sometimes struggles with cases involving killer moms. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.